thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you here bright and early in the morning. And I know we invited you early. But what we were trying to do is just occupy the first half of your day to let you all work for the second. So thank you once again for being here. It's a pleasure to have all of you. So over the last year, we have seen a very large increase in the number of labor audits and compliance requirements in France. So that's why we thought it makes a lot of sense to actually do a seminar on the compliance, best practices for compliance. So the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce our speakers for today, our panel. We have Fiona Mougenot, Managing Director of Expat Partners. A lot of you already know her. She's been in the India market for quite some time now and has met a lot of you. We have Sarah Mustafa, who's the founder of MS Law Firm. Sarah is an employment law attorney. She has and is currently dealing with quite a few small and medium Indian IT clients. We also have Erica Pierre-Louis, she's the payroll expert with Audit CPA. Audit CPA is a payroll social security firm, and they also handle a lot of Indian IT clients. So that's our panel for today. A few ground rules, if I may, before we start. May I request that you keep your cell phones on silent? May I request that we don't get into individual cases? Generic questions are more than welcome. If you do have an individual question that you want to ask, I request that you hold it until the end of the session. We have a networking lunch, and you can actually speak to the expert you want to speak to then. Feel free to ask questions. The more, the merrier. It's through asking these questions that they get to understand where you need more information and makes it more meaningful for everyone. So we'd like to put forward this little disclaimer. Request you to go through it. Looking at this, now you know we have a lawyer in our midst. Okay, so there has been a significant increase in the number of foreign employees on assignment in France over the last year. In fact, we have figures that say there's an increase of about 25% in 2016. As I mentioned earlier, the number of audits from the labor inspection audits have increased in multiples. To be honest with you, we are 14 years old at Expat Partners. In the first 13 years, we hardly saw an audit. Very, very few and far between. In the last year, they've become common. There is a significant increase in the foreign employer and the host company's obligations. And we will take you through a lot of these during the session. Employment of foreign workers in France has been complex and remains as such. Okay, so we are dividing up this presentation or this session into three parts. The first one is prior entry. The second part is during the stay in France. And the third part is after. Okay, so I think we should let's get started straight away. So I now hand it over to Fiona, who will take you through the categories of permits.
Good morning, everybody. So to start with, we're going to go through the different permit possibilities that you have in France. I'd just like to mention two things before we get started. There are two subjects that we're not really going to go into, but which are also going to be very, very important in the coming year. Well, one of them is very important in the coming year, is going to be data privacy. And it's something which anybody who's going to be working with firms in the EU, transferring information, you need to look into. We're taking this very seriously. All three partners that are here, we take this very seriously. And the other subject that we're not going to be getting into, but which also needs to be seen by your legal departments, is if you're working in France, what structure do you have? What type of a company have you set up? And that's going to determine a lot of things that you can do or that you cannot do, and that may need changing as well. So regarding the permit categories, as we all know, we have short and long term. So some of you know this off by heart and others may not, so I'm just going to do a short refresher course on what is a short term. A short term is taking the Schengen rulings. The Schengen rulings means that you can spend 90 days over a 180-day period. And that is not just coming into France, it's coming into any of the Schengen countries, and it's rolling. So that means that if you've had an employee who's been to Germany for 2 weeks 3 months ago, you're going to have to take into consideration that he was in Germany for 2 weeks, and that has to be knocked off his 90 days. And it rolls over, so you have to calculate it the whole time if you're using the short term. Short-term permits can never be extended in country. So that also has to be taken into consideration when you've got projects going on and you're sending your employees in. Always remember, okay, is this really going to be a 2 month or a 2.5 month, or actually is the project manager at the end of the day going to say to me, hey, Prakash needs to stay there an extra month? He can't stay an extra month. So sometimes it's actually much better to go into a long term. So under the short term, we have this very new category, which is an IT expert. We have the usual temporary detachment. Both of these categories, they're on detachment status. And then we have the long-term detachment, the talent passport, a lot of you know and have heard about, salarié en mission, and the talent passport European blue card. And we have an ICT detachment, all of which we're going to go into. I'll also explain about the ICT detachment EU ruling as well. So now I would like to know who in the audience could explain what detachment is.
Anybody?
Implies the possibility of detachment of employees in France. But what exactly is an employee on detachment? The French Labour Code indicates that an employee on detachment in France is employed by a company located outside of France, working for a limited period of time in France, under two conditions. The first, there is a work contract between this employee and the foreign employer. It means that you cannot hire an employee for the sole purpose of sending him immediately in France. Though in practice, we advise that the employee has been hired by the foreign employee for at least 3 months before being sent to France. The second condition is that this work contract continues during the detachment. It means that the employee on detachment remains on home country work contract. The employee reporting line will always be with home company as the working relationship continues during the detachment. The consequences of this definition is that the detachment in France must be temporary. But French law doesn't define what temporary means and what is the maximum period for a detachment. That's why this can create different interpretations and complexity. The President Macron is currently discussing with the other European countries the idea of limiting the maximum period of detachment. But it seems that the other countries don't agree because it could be an obstacle to freedom to provide services. So you have to keep in mind that during the detachment, certain French mandatory rules have to be applied. We'll explain to you later what are these rules.
So let's go into a little bit of detail for the short term. So we've got two categories which we're going to go into right now, which are detachment status. So since November, you have a new category, which is an IT expert. How do we define an IT expert? There is no written rules on this. We've benchmarked this, and we, inside Expat Partners, have taken a stand that you cannot consider an employee as an expert unless they have a minimum of 5 years working experience, that they have a degree, but most important, that they are paid before you send them to France, so they're paid here in India, as an expert. And that will be verified by the French consulate. When you go in to apply, they're going to look at their pay slips, and if they see that the person is a junior level and really doesn't qualify, you're not going to get it. So while the advantage is that you don't have to go through a work permit for this, you actually have to do quite a large file to justify that you are sending somebody who is an IT expert and who is needed in France as an expert during the assignment. Of course, you have to have under this a service agreement. He's going to be on detachment. He's going to be working on the client side. His reporting line, as Sarah has explained, this is very, very important. The reporting line is to home country management. That is something that we keep seeing, that the labour inspectors keep seeing. They go in, they control your people, and some wonderful employee says, oh, I am actually reporting into Mr. Dupont inside the company in France. That is not authorized. You're loaning an employee. You have to remember that all these people are going to provide a service as such. French Social Security for anybody coming from India is mandatory, except for the Provident Pension Fund, i.e. you have a Provident Pension Fund certificate. Erica will be explaining this in detail. You are not required to take the pension portion of the French Social Security. As I explained, there's no extension that is possible. Now, let's say that you do have a service agreement, but you're going to be sending people in and they really don't qualify as IT experts, and they may be having a completely different role. You can still send them to France for short term, and you're going to use a temporary detachment as a service provider. So it's again, they're on their detachment status. They report back to their manager. You have to have your service agreement in place, and they will also be having the French Social Security as such.
Before we go on, Erica, could you please explain for employees on detachment from India the payroll requirements and the Provident Pension Fund certificate?
Yes, please. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ron. Indeed, we are here to discuss about the best practices to be compliant in France. One of them is at the hiring of the employee, we make some compulsory registration. And the first one is a pre-recruitment declaration, what we call TPEA. And it must be processed 8 calendar days before the hiring or the assignment in France to the URSSAF, which is the French social contribution French funds in France. Then there is the single registration staff, which will be required in case of any inspection during the company. You've got as well the medical visit, and in case of assignment, this is processed by the host company. But of course, you will have all the details later. We are talking about pension scheme and referring to the certificate of coverage, which is required if the employee is not entitled to pay pension contribution in France. If the employee is possessing this documentation, the retirement, the pension contribution are paid in India, not in France. Then we've got provided pension scheme, and of course are excluded the employees under assignment if the employer is delivering the employer's Provident Fund organised certification. With this form, the employee is not compulsory. It's not compulsory to make the registration of the pension contribution. And then the last one is the health insurance scheme. From January the 1st, 2016, all the companies in France must provide a collective health insurance scheme to all the employees. And of course, there are some exclusion depending case to case. There are as well compulsory mention information under the pay slips. On the first part, there is the employee information, which are name, surname, date and place of birth, French address, social contribution number. Once Fiona and her team has made all the registration regarding the immigration procedure. And the job title, the position and the seniority we have recorded into the work contract or the assignment letter. On the side of the company information, to be, of course, mentioned on the payslip, which is legal information and therefore compulsory information, is of course the name of the company, the SARET number, which is the ID number of the company regarding the French system, and what we call the APA code is related to the activity, the main activity of the company in France. Then you've got the USAF number, like the employee gets the social contribution number. And of course, the collective bargaining agreement, which is related to your activity, which is for most of you, the collective labor agreement of Syntec. And of course, the address of the company in France or in India, depending on the legal form of the company you have recorded in France.
So Fiona, are there any other requirements for the employer, home country company and the French host company?
Yes, there are definitely. So you've already seen with Erica, that's quite a lot that has to be done. Some of it, because they're short term, may not actually be fully done. When we're talking about a short term, like the medical, when Erica talks about a medical, we're not talking about an immigration medical, we're talking about a labor law medical. So anybody who's going to come in for 3 months, we're not going to be able to do that. It's too short. These are defined medical labor law centres, and to get the registration and to get it done already takes 4 or 5 months. So you don't have to worry about it. It's just the fact that it has to be in place even if the employee does not have his medical as such. So what's required from an immigration standpoint prior to entry for people who are on detachment? You have a prior detachment declaration. And now this is very important because a lot of you, I know, are also dealing with employees who are not coming from India, but who could be coming from the UK or from Germany and who are EU nationals. The prior detachment declaration is actually for any employee on detachment, even a French national. So a French national who's living in the UK, who's employed by a UK company, who's sent to France to work for 2 weeks, a prior detachment declaration is mandatory. This is an online filing, and it goes to the labour inspection directly. And in that online filing, you will have a lot of details about who the employee is, where he's going, his level, his salary, whether he's on French social security, home country social security. All this information goes in there. So the labour inspection is going to actually be seeing quite a lot of information prior to anything happening as such. You also now have to designate for each employee a legal representative. Now, the legal representative for all those who are working in the legal teams is not somebody who's liable for the company. The legal representative will be acting as the foreign company's representative to the labour inspection. And the legal representative has to be somebody in France physically. You have to give the person the address, and this person has to maintain documents in France. They have to maintain documents such as the service agreement, pay slips, timesheets. Timesheets have to be, we'll go into the details of this, but they have to be signed by the employee and the home country manager. Justification of the payment of the salary as well. All of that has to be maintained by the legal representative. Both of these documents, so the prior detachment declaration and the legal representative letter, and the proof that these have been filed, has to be provided to the on-site HR manager or director, together with a copy of the work authorization or the visa or the passport, depending on what the case is. The HR manager is then going to have to register the employee who is on detachment from your company in their personnel register. They will then have all of the information. If there is a labour inspection, they will know that they have to contact Mr. Dupont, who's been designated as the legal representative.
So Sarah, if you would like to summarize for French labour law the authorized types of detachment.
Sure. As you see, there are 4 types of authorized detachments in France. The first is the most frequent. For example, a customer in France needs to use a India IT company expertise. The India company detaches its employees to the customer on a temporary basis in order to complete the mission. The second situation, for example, an Indian company detaches its employees in its subsidiary in France on a temporary basis and without any profit. And the third situation that's clear, temporary employment agency located outside of France. And the last situation on behalf and for the benefit of foreign employer home country entity. But as I indicated previously, the first situation is the most frequent.
Sarah, can you please develop on the requirements for the service agreement?
Yes, this is the next page. You have to keep in mind that it is very important to clearly define in the service agreement signed between the home country employer and the client in France the purpose and the conditions of the service delivery. It is in order to avoid illegal labor leasing. We will focus on the main characteristics of a service agreement. Every service agreement must have a defined mission with specific tasks, which are provided by the foreign employer to the French customer when the latter hasn't got the expertise and skills to carry out the specific work with its own staff. The equipment and materials necessary to deliver the services must be provided to the employees on detachment by the foreign employer. The foreign company, that means the employer, is subject to an obligation to achieve a result in performing the service agreement, whether concerning achievement, completion deadlines, or the compliance of the expected service assignments. Another important point, it is recommended to specify a lump sum of fees based on service delivery and never on the number of hours or days worked by employees.
I just wanted to step in here about that. If in a service agreement, or if a labour inspector can see that you are billing hours or days, you're getting into illegal work. You are not authorised to loan an employee. The only people who can do that will be a temporary employment agency. So Kelly Services, anybody like that, they can do that, Edico. But a company cannot loan an employee. That is unauthorised.
Except in the service agreement, in order to bring a specific skills. The agreement must be very clear and show the absence of a subordination relationship between the employees on detachment and the customer in France. That's why it is important to document, as you said previously, timesheets of the employees have to be reviewed and signed by the home country manager and the employees on detachment. Emails showing that the employees are in a regular contact with the home country manager and not with the French customer. Finding that these conditions may constitute an illegal labor leasing, and the sanction could be severe: criminal penalties, nullity of the service agreement, and so on.
So Sarah, if you would like to summarize the difference between temporary and permanent activity.
The difference between temporary and permanent activity is very important. But the French law doesn't define what temporary means. This area of French law is unclear. That's why we can have different possible interpretations. So in the end, it will be decided on a case-by-case basis. In practice, the labor or inspector will take into account, for instance, the revenue or the number of contracts realized in France and in India, checks if the Indian company recruits directly in France, if there is a prospective activity of customers in France. So in case of temporary detachment, certain rules in the French Labour Code are mandatory. I will explain to you later which rules are mandatory. But as regards of India, French social security is applicable except for retirement portion of the social security. And the model could be a deputation or an assignment letter, so no need for a French employment contract. In case of permanent activity, the French rules for detachment of employees are not applicable. But in my view, if the activity of the foreign company is exclusively focused in France, or if the activity in France is greater than in India, it would be probably considered that the foreign employer has a permanent activity in France and the rules on detachment do not apply. So in case of permanent activity, the French Labour Code is applicable, the full French Labour Code, and not only certain French mandatory rules. Full French social security is applicable. And in case of detachment on an intra-group assignment, a French local work contract will be required. So there are two types of work contract in France: indefinite term contract (CDI) or fixed term contract (CD). And during the French local work contract, the Indian contract will be suspended.
So now I suggest that we take a look at the other long-term permanent categories and the implications that these have. Sorry.
Yes, of course. So you've already had quite a lot to digest to start the morning. So we'll go back into some immigration, which I think a lot of you will find a little bit easier before I turn you back to these people. So,
Fiona, if I may interrupt.
Yes.
Before we get back into this, are there any questions you would like to ask?
Let's say it's going to be the French company that has the service agreement with the client in France, or it may be the US company, or let's even say maybe a company in Jersey. When we see this, the important thing is that inside that service agreement, it must mention which entity is deploying the people to the on-site. So if you have a service agreement and it's your French entity that has it with the client in France, inside that service agreement it stipulates that company X in India will be providing staff for the on-site services, then that's fine. And it should list what the on-site services are, of course. If it doesn't have that inside your agreement, you have two options. Either you add in an annex separately, preferably that is signed by all parties, so it's signed by the French company who has his MSA and his client, and it's also signed by the entity in India who is sending the employee there. Or, if not, one of the things that does work is a purchase order. Now, if you have a purchase order, that's fine, but your purchase order is going to have to be very detailed in that it's got to list the services. It's not just, I'm purchasing a tractor. That's not going to work. But if it's, it actually says what the on-site services are, the dates of the assignment if possible, but at least the duration of the assignment, how many people maybe are going in there to provide the services, and what is going to be the payment for these services, then that will be acceptable as well. There are ways of working around it, but there must be a mention somewhere of where these people are coming from. So,
Suresh has a question.
You also talked about social security payments.
Suresh, can you be a little louder, please?
talked about social security payment in France also, right? So how do we pay? You said that home country has to have home payroll and a data.
Yes, it's something we're gonna talk about in a few minutes.
Any other questions? Yes, Arman.
You mentioned legal representative.
Yes.
If we provide services, let's say from India, and we have a kind of branch, we have a branch in France, but we have very few people from the India based out of France. Can we outsource the legal representative role to Japan?
Yes, you may outsource that to anybody. Anybody can be designated as the legal representative. It has to have the person's name, address, and the person has to sign on the letter accepting to act as the legal representative as such.
Any more questions? Sorry for interrupting, Fiona.
Not at
Go
all,
ahead.
not at all. So, long term, we have the ICT detachment. So that's an intra-company detachment, and you're transferring your employee to provide some sort of a service, or he's going into training, knowledge sharing to your entity in France. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the ICT EU directive. This is the same, except that what you have to remember is that if you take the EU ruling says somewhere that yes, you may deploy your person to a client site. And then, 3 pages later, it's going to completely contradict what it says, and it clearly says that this cannot be used for services. Services as in what we all discuss about services. So you can only use this ICT detachment to send an employee to work inside your entity in France. You cannot use this to send them to work on a client site. And that's very, very important, because otherwise you're getting into what we call double detachment, so illegal working, body shopping. So if you do have an employee who you want to send to your entity, short term or long term, you can use this category. So the employee has to have a minimum employment of 3 months within the group prior to filing the category. Employee will be on detachment. You all know what that is now. So he remains on his India, if he's employed from India, employment contract. He will have an assignment letter. He will have French social security. If it's long term, it can be for a maximum of 3 years. Above 3 years now, there's no further extension as such. Okay? So that's a maximum of 3 years working inside your entity in France. As I said, may not work on a client site. And what's very important is that the reporting line remains to India. Okay? Of course, it's intra-company on a daily basis. He's going to be working with colleagues and management in France. I mean, let's be clear about it. But there should regularly be some form of a reporting line that comes back to India. So either you set it up on an email or whatever, but you can document this as well. We then have the talent passport. So in the past you had the salarié en mission, and the salarié en mission was both detachment ICT and local status ICT. Then in November last year, it was split into 2 categories. ICT detachment, which I've just spoken about, and talent passport salarié en mission. Huge benefit here. What is the big benefit? 2 to 3 weeks processing time frame. ICT detachment, it's the same. 2 to 3 weeks processing time frame. You file directly at the French consulate. So that is absolutely fantastic for you, because we're no longer talking about 8 weeks getting a permit. We're talking about 2 to 3 weeks. If you're using the talent passport salarié en mission, again, your employee must have his 3 months employment with the group. Here, he is going to be moved onto a French employment contract. I'm not going to go into the details. Sarah will be discussing this a little bit later, but it's a French employment contract plus an assignment letter, so that you're very clear about what he's doing, where he's going, and that he's going to come back home as well. The employee may be placed at a client site under certain conditions. most important, that there is a service agreement, and this time between the French entity and the client in France, and the French entity because he's employed by the French entity. So that's where you can use this. There must be a rotation. You do not place an employee on a permanent basis on a client site, even if he's on a French contract. French employees are not authorized to go and be placed to work inside a company permanently. So what some consulting firms see, and the big ones we see this, is that they send their people in as consultants to work on their client sites, but once a week at least, they come back into their offices, either for meetings, to pick up documents, whatever, and it's documented. A lot of the time the consultant doesn't even realize it's documented, but it's all documented so that it's very, very clear what happens. Now, there's no ruling about this rotation, how you set it up. Sarah's going to explain a little bit more. We suggest that it can be half a day a week, 1 day a week, 2 days a month, but you have to put this in place so that when the labour inspection comes in and they say, yes, but this person's been sitting here for 2 years, you can say, no, he does not sit permanently at Alcatel's site. He comes into our offices. Please see this. Reporting line, of course, is going to be to the management in France here. The permit can be for up to 4 years, and an extension is possible. I would like to mention that this permit category and the one before has a big benefit as well, that there is an accompanying family procedure, and spouses will get permits that allow them to work. Now, both of these categories, and the salarié en mission one especially, the employee cannot be employed by another company in France. So he can't jump and leave you. He's completely tied to you. So that's the sort of insurance policy that you have, that you're spending a lot of money sending him to France, and he's there for 4 years, and he's gaining experience, and there's knowledge sharing that's happening with the team. He can't suddenly say, oh, but there is this other company who would really like me to go and work with him. Fine, then he has to come back to India and he has to start all over again. So that's quite a good guarantee. This does not lead to anything long-term. A lot of the people come to us and they say, I've been here for 6 years, I'd like to have a 10-year permit. No, you cannot. And this does not lead to French citizenship either. So you may have employees who are going to say after a couple of years, but actually I really want to settle here, my family's here, my children go to school here, what are you going to offer to me because I don't want to stay under this category? So, what can you offer? You can offer something which is completely different, which is called a talent passport European blue card. Now, under the European blue card, the difference is that this employee is not on any form of an ICT transfer. Here, he is fully employed by the French company, exactly like a French employee. It's exactly the same. This is for highly skilled people, or highly skilled, we've seen people who've got 5 years experience who get this. There is a high level of salary because the minimum gross annual salary is 53,836 euros today for France. So it's not for a junior, I would say. The employment contract can be fixed term, but if it's fixed term, it's a minimum of 12 months. Or it can be a definite period as such. French Social Security is going to be full French Social Security. The permit is for 4 years, or can be up to 4 years, and can be extended. The first 2 years, the employee is tied into the company and cannot change. After that period, yes, he can change employers with this permit. He does not have to get a new permit. Now, I know that a lot of you are going to say, okay, this is a European blue card, so where does Europe come up here? Europe comes up in a very, very small portion. Anybody who is on a local contract in France, you can actually transfer them for a short term to another EU or Schengen country. Most of the time without having to get another permit. There will probably be some declarations that you have to do in the country, and you have to check this. So if you're going to be sending somebody from France to Germany, you have to check in Germany what is going to be required to send somebody, let's say, for a 3-week assignment. With a European blue card, that's great. Long term, What's the difference? Long term, it doesn't mean that he can go around Europe just with this wonderful permit that he was issued with 4 years ago and nothing else is required. No. But it does mean that he hasn't got to go through a full process. So I'm going to give you the example of somebody coming in with a European blue card issued by Germany. So he's got his German European blue card and you wish to hire him in France. He can come straight into France and we take him into the prefecture and we file there. And he will be authorized to work immediately, providing all the things are in place, his salary, etc. Providing all of that, you don't have to go through a full process of visa, work permit, etc. You go to the prefecture. But France being France, sorry ladies, France being France, the process at the prefecture is actually 6 to 8 weeks minimum. So a lot of the time we say it's much easier to go to the consulate in Germany, to the French consulate, because it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks and we start off all over again. So if if you have other service providers who say to you, no, what Fiona said, don't listen to her, I do agree that it's sometimes easier to refile completely. But it's on a case-by-case basis that happens there. So the European Blue Card has a lot of advantages for the employee, because he really is going to get into the French advantages. He will be able to apply for long-term residence, permanent residence, and French citizenship through this as well.
So Sarah, I know that there are multiple points regarding the French employment contract that need to be taken into account. Can you explain those to us, and also the idea and reason for rotation?
First, we will describe the main types of contracts in France. You have the fixed term contract, CDD. There are a start date and generally end date. This means that you cannot terminate the CDD before the end date, except if mutual agreement or gross misconduct. The CDD is limited number of situations. For example, a temporary increase in business activity. The fixed term contract is limited to a maximum of 18 months. It can be renewed twice. For example, 3-month contract extended for 6 months plus 9 months. At the end of the fixed term contract, the employer has to pay an indemnity of 10% of the total gross salary paid to the employee as precarity allowance. The indefinite period contract, CDI, you have a start date but no end date. You can terminate, for example, for dismissal, resignation of the employee, mutual agreement. At the end of the contract, you have several termination indemnities to be paid by the employer. The rotation of the employees is an important point, and it is advisable, should the assignment be for 12 months or above, that there is some form of rotation of the employee between the client's office and the foreign employer French office. This is to show that the employee is not permanently and solely working for the client, which could be interpreted as loaning an employee or employment or of a permanent nature with the client. And of course, reporting line is to foreign employers French office.
So Erica, can you please explain the difference on the payroll for an employee on a local contract in France?
Yes, of course, and as you mentioned regarding the social contribution, for the local employee, that is to say, on the full French contribution, you've got 25% of employee contribution based on the gross salary, the total gross salary. On the opposite, for the employer, which is made 45%. Versus the employee on detachment are only 15% for the employee's contribution and 25% on the employer contribution. Of course, for the detachment, as you mentioned, that's with the COC, what we call the certificate of coverage, which means that the employee is already contributing to the intern pension contribution because of the social security bilateral agreements between France and India. So you've got those percentages for the French employee and deputy employee. As the social contribution is deducted from the placers, the employer is paying all the social contribution on behalf of the employee, the two parts, the parts of the employee parts and the employer parts. We are talking about the legal form of the employee, and depending on the legal form, which means subsidiary or branch, you pay the contribution to yourself of Paris. On the contrary, for the deputy and cement, because of the legal form of the company is what we call ASAF, which is being a company without French establishment, we have to declare, register, and pay the contribution to yourself to do that.
So Sarah, for this category, talent passport, European blue card permit, would the employment contract be any different for European blue card?
No, it's the same.
It's the same. Is an assignment letter required?
No, because the employee is not supposed to return back to India. He's directly hired in France.
Perfect. Should there be a rotation?
Yes, of course.
Brilliant. So before we move on, again we've come to the next logical point in our journey on this presentation for me to ask if you have any questions. I know we've given you a great data.
Last point you mentioned about the blue card.
Nandu, a little louder, sir.
Okay, on the blue card, you mentioned that rotation is, I don't think so.
If they're on the client side.
On the client side,
Okay.
when there is a service agreement, this is to show that the employee.
Sometimes people can say to us, but we can't do a rotation, we do not have an office, how do we maintain this? Fine, if you cannot physically put in place that, at least you've got to have very, very strict reporting lines then. You would really have to have weekly calls, they're documented, any instructions are given by the manager, even if it's a French manager. Because we're going back to the fact that you cannot loan an employee. And you have to be able to show that you are not loaning your employee to the company for a service.
It would be the same rules for a French employee.
But it's not necessarily a physical rotation.
Well, so we suggest that it should be physical. If you look at any of the large French consulting practices, they never would put an employee for 12 months to work on a client site. Never, ever. They will always physically have their employee come back into their office at certain periods. And it's very, very variable as such. When immediately you start physically putting somebody permanently on a client site, you've got to be very careful about what you're doing, because that's when the labour inspection is going to say, okay, how long has he been here? He's been here for 3 years? 3 years on the client site? It's permanent. And you have to also remember, on a European blue card, this is another thing which you have to be very careful about, well, actually with all categories, is that your employee, who in a strange manner, employees learn about French labour law very quickly, and they have a lot of knowledge. It's a network out there. And what happens is that your employee, you may say, I'm putting him on assignment, he's working, and I'm going to say Alcatel, which is, we're just going to use Alcatel every time, Alcatel site. And after 2 years, you're going to say, I want to put him back to France, into India. And your employee is going to turn around and say, no, I don't want to go back home. So Sarah's going to speak about this, but your employee can also turn around and say to your client, I've been sitting here for 2 years, under French law, I have a right to tell you to employ me. And they can take them to court, and they will win. Which is why we're trying to protect all of your companies by putting these little points in place. And once you have them, you're going to be fine. If you don't have them, you're exposing everybody to a lot of risk.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Shankar.
Gross minimum wage, does it include variable pay in it? If company is paying variable pay to the employee,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
The employee is getting
Yes.
variable pay as part of his salary.
Yes?
Does it comply with the minimum wage requirement?
So his
I'm
question
sorry,
is, if an employee is getting a variable pay as a part of his salary, does that count for a part of his minimum wage?
Not at all, sir. There is, we have to make the difference between the basic salary and all the components of bonus payment, any exceptional premium, and so on. But we will see later discussion with
So on the long-term ICT detachment slide, you mentioned about the French Social Security contribution.
Sorry, Nandu, again a little louder, please.
Okay, so I didn't have my breakfast, but still.
Oh!
Then let me stand next to you so you get caught in the mic.
That's okay. So on the ICT detachment, you have mentioned about the French Social Security. So I would believe that's the partial, it's not the full.
Correct.
Social Security.
Completely correct.
Okay.
Detachment is, when you're on detachment, you have to see, is there a bilateral treaty agreement between France and the home country? So for India there is, but it's only partial right now. Maybe Mr. Macron is going to be able to push everybody that you get a full one. That would be fantastic. But right now it's only partial, and it's only on the Provident Pension Fund and the pension requirements as such. But if you had somebody coming, let's say from Spain, or somebody coming from the US, this is a really good example. US to France, there's a complete bilateral service agreement, and so there's no French social security.
So before we go on, 1 second, Shiva. I have a request from the back for Erica and Sarah to speak a little louder. Fiona can be heard, the two of you all, they're having a little trouble. Sorry, Shiva, go ahead.
No problem. So you're mentioning about this talent passport on the first part, where the person can work in a client side. Do you have a restriction, because it attaches to the contract, and whether it can be client as well as corporate, right? In that situation, do you have any restriction on the salaries if he is working in both the places?
Should be the same.
Should be the same.
Should be the same.
There's no restriction of a province, whether there's something
No.
which is going to be impacting.
No, absolutely none. Whether they work in Corsica, or whether they work in Marseille, or they work in Paris, the level of salary has to be the same, and it's always going to be not only depending on the permit category, but also depending on the collective bargaining agreement. So if it's Syntec, well then it's the Syntec, but you may have a different sort of bargaining agreement, but whichever is the highest of the two has to be taken.
Highest of the
Highest of the two, always, okay?
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll now move on to the second part of this presentation, which is about the requirements during assignment in France. Fiona, what are the requirements from an immigration perspective?
So the requirements from an immigration perspective, it's mainly going to be for those who are on detachment. The prior detachment declaration, which is online, as I said, must be filed 2 working days prior to the employee starting. This is really very important. We see very often that actually we're informed after the employee has arrived, which means that the prior detachment declaration has not been filed, which means that if there was a labour inspection day 1 and the employee's there, you're going to be caught. So that is very important. You also have to file this designation of the legal representative as well. Again, it's 2 days before. You're going to have post-arrival. So post-arrival, you're going to have, for anybody who is on detachment, pure detachment, temporary detachment as a service provider, they will be issued with either a visa, which is for the length of their assignment when it's under 12 months, and it's quite variable on this. Each consulate have their own little thing that they like to do. As you know, the French, it's a country where people invent. So So the administrations also invent, and it's never the same. Each consulate is different, each prefecture, each labour office is different, and they'll tweak here and there. So generally speaking, if an ICT detachment or a temporary detachment, they will be issued, let's say, for a 6-month assignment with a 6-month visa. For a temporary detachment, which isn't ICT, temporary detachment as a service provider, the longest visa they will get is for 1 year, 12 months. And this will be called VLSTS. I won't give you the French name, but it's VLSTS is the category. It's not written on the visa. It's D visa, of course, because it's long term. And when they come into France, they have to have a registration with the Immigration Office, which is called the OFII, the OFI, and they go in for a medical, and they go in for a residence registration. Now, this has to be filed within the first 3 months of their arrival. It has to be filed. It doesn't have to be completed. It has to be filed. And one of the things is, of course, your employee needs to find somewhere to live. So he has to find somewhere to live, and then we file as such. And once we filed, then they will be invited about 8 weeks later to complete this. And they get a stamp in their passports, which we call a residence sticker as such. For them, it doesn't matter if they change addresses, because that category, they don't have to notify if they change their address as such. And of course, then you're going to get into extensions. Now, for other ICT detachments, it's going to depend. If they have an assignment that is 12 months or less, they will be exactly like the others. They get their 12-month visa, they come in, we go through the office. If on the other hand you have somebody on an ICT detachment who's there for 2 years, he will get a 3-month visa, category D again, and here we have to file, and we have to file super quick for his permit, his titre de séjour at the prefecture. And why do we have to file super quick? Because as of when his visa, his 3-month visa, expires, until he has his actual permit, he wouldn't be able to travel. And that can be a major issue. So you have to also take into consideration that if you have these categories of people, you need to think about, okay, where is he going to live, and can we get this done in the first month? Can we find him a home? Can he maybe, what we advise for a lot of people, is that maybe to begin with they're going to stay with somebody, and we can file like that, but you'll also have to do a change of address. Anybody who has a permit card, a titre de séjour, if they change addresses, that has to be notified to the prefecture. Legally, it's supposed to be notified within 8 days. Honestly, it doesn't happen that it's done in 8 days, but they have to do the change. They have to do the change for their permit, and they have to do their change for ERICA, as well for the payslips. Addresses are always going to be very important. Addresses are also going to be very important for those who are being registered for the French Social Security. For that, when I say registered, I'm not talking about payroll. I'm talking about the employee applying for his Social Security number. Some of you may have heard about this. It's called the CPAM, C-P-A-M, CPAM. It's much worse than applying for a work permit. It's the worst procedure that exists in the whole of France, and it's the same for a French person as well. They lose documents constantly, it's horribly long, and it's not meant to be complicated, but it is very complicated as such, and it's all in French. So your poor employee, when he's applying for his French Social Security number, he's going to have to produce original of his birth certificate, he's got to have an apostille, he's got to have a bank account, he's got to provide a document on his bank account, he's got to have his DPAE, all these kinds of things. And the addresses are going to be taken into consideration. One point that we would also like to make now is, please can you tell your employees that when they take an address in France, they check on the letterbox that their name is there. Because any document that's sent by a French administration is going to be sent to them. And if they don't have a name on the letterbox, then the mail gets lost and nobody knows what's happening. So it's something that we see constantly, so that you don't get into any delays. Now, may they travel in and out of France for those who have a long-term visa multi-entry, yes, and it's always going to be multi-entry. So either on those first 3 months they can travel in and out of France, or if they're on a longer term visa, they can travel in and out of France. They can travel to any Schengen country. So for those who forget, UK is not part of Schengen, and very soon UK won't even be part of Europe as such. The other requirements for employees and detachment is the timesheets. I know Sarah's going to go into a lot about this. Timesheets and working hours, it has to show working hours on the timesheets. Timesheets for those who are on detachment must be signed by the employee and by his manager in his home country as well. The legal representative, as we said, has to be filed, and the legal representative has to maintain in France copies of pay slips, timesheets, and the justification of payment of the salary. Now, when we say pay slips, for all the people who are on detachment from India, we're talking about the shadow pay slips. We're not talking about their India pay slips. We want to see the shadow pay slips that's going to have the French Social Security, so that the inspector can actually say, oh yes, that's great, this person is this category, he's been paid the right amount, and he's got his Social Security as such. If you have multi-site workers, so they're working in Toulouse, and then they're going to be working 1 month later in Marseille, and then they're going to be coming up to Paris. Every time you have to file the prior detachment declaration and the legal representative later, because it's jurisdictional. So you have to refile it. You also have to refile it when there's an extension, of course. So that the labour inspector is going to actually be able to track where your employee is. There's nothing that's on a GPS yet. Probably it's going to come soon. Maybe it's going to be set up here. But today we're still using paper as such. So talent passport, salarié en mission, and European blue cards, it's slightly different. If their contract, their French employment contract, is for 12 months, or the salarié en mission could be less than 12 months, they will be with the VLS-TS visa, and they will go through the OFI registration. They will not have a medical for immigration. They will only get a residence registration, multi-entry. If, on the other hand, it's above 12 months, which a lot of the time, especially for a European blue card, it's going to be above 12 months, they will be getting the 3-month visa, and there we will be filing at the prefecture. And they would get a 4-year permit. Now, a 4-year permit, you can all say to me, that is fantastic, no extensions, we're away, this is great. But you have to remember all these little things about rotation, timesheets, reporting lines, and what happens if my employee comes back to India, he's going to sit here for 1 year, and then I send him back to France. Now, we believe that you, as employers, need to be very aware that these permits are tied to you legally. And our suggestion is that anybody who returns to India, your employee should give back to you, and either you cut it up, or you send it back to your immigration service provider to have returned, but you don't let an employee keep his permit. Because if you do, your employee may start using it for something else, and your project managers are going to jump off this, because this is just wonderful. You've got somebody, Prakash is there, he's got his 4-year permit, nobody knows about it, and so I'm going to send him all around the place. And actually I'm going to send him to Germany for a couple of weeks, because he needs to do some knowledge sharing. You don't know about it, nobody knows about it, nothing's been done that should have been done. So these long-term permits need a lot of control in there to be really certain what's happening. And we also need the control because Erica is going to be needing to know when to cut off the payroll, which is she's also going to be talking about it. I've talked about the change of address, which is very, very important for this category, so that their permits tie in and have the correct address in there.
Sarah, I believe that there are a number of important points to be respected during the assignment in France. So we'll ask you to give us something about that.
It's the next slide.
Oops.
So yes, in case of detachment, mandatory French rules are applicable, but to limited matters, as you see. This is to avoid body shopping. Of course, if the foreign rules regarding these limited matters are more favorable than the French rule, then the foreign rules will be...
You have to be a little louder.
Yes.
Maybe take your mic a little higher.
It's okay?
Speak.
If the foreign... It's okay?
Better? Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. If the foreign rules regarding these limited matters are more favorable, then the foreign rules will be applied. But please note that the French labor inspector will focus in case of control on working time and minimum wage. Under French law, the employee on detachment in France can sue his employer, for example, an Indian company, before the French labor court in case of non-compliance with these mandatory French rules. But in my experience, this type of litigation is very rare in France.
It is very rare, but I can tell you all, I've had the scenario inside the Indian embassy where I was doing a presentation where somebody stood up and said, my situation isn't like that, and just so that you know, expat partners you're handling, and I don't have French social security. And then you go, oh my goodness, what's happening here? So you have to be careful because they do know about the rules very quickly as well.
Yes, and regarding these mandatory rules, in the last few years, the French government has reinforced sanctions. One is the next page. There are criminal penalties. There are many different types of penalties, but because the criminal penalties remain rare, it's depends on the case. Heavy administrative penalties have been created by Macron when he was minister. So administrative penalties could be ordered by the French administration. For instance, in case of failure to file a prior detachment declaration, to designate a legal representative in French of the foreign company, or to provide certain required documents to the labor inspector. The fine is 2,000 euro per employee with a total limit of 500,000 euro. And the labor inspector has a limited period of 2 years to order a fine from the day where the violation has committed. Also, the suspension of the service agreement for a maximum of 1 month. This is another new sanction created by President Macron when he was minister. It could be ordered by the French administration, for example, in case of non-compliance with the minimum wage or working time, days off. The suspension of the service agreement does not give the right to the employer to stop paying the employees. You have to continue to pay the employee. But normally, in general, the labor inspector first asks the foreign company to rectify the situation before sanctioning.
I think if you show goodwill at the beginning,
Yes.
it does help.
Of course. We will focus now on the minimum wage because it's the main concern of the labor inspector. Generally, the collective bargaining agreement Syntec is applicable for a 90 company. It means that the employer can pay above but not below the following minimum wage as per Syntec. So
We're going to show you the slide.
okay. As you see, for the legal duration of work in France is 35 hours per week. You have a salary, but the salary depends on the level of the employee. And the level of the employee is in link with his responsibilities in the company. That's why it is required to indicate in the payslip the level of the employee. Because without the level, you cannot check if the minimum wage is respected or not. And if not, it could be an issue in case of audit by the labor inspector. Now I would like to discuss the component of the salary. As per the applicable, it's the next slide. As per the applicable rules, the components to include in the salary in order to check whether the minimum wage is respected or not are the following: the salary or additional compensation, bonuses, benefit in kind, regular extra hours. Are excluded from the salary exceptional bonuses not guaranteed in the contract, expenses reimbursement, travel allowance. These items are not included in the salary on which the minimum wage is determined. Then the labor inspector can request the pay slips or any document justifying the payment of the salary in order to check the compliance. That's why we will focus on the payroll in order to check this employee in Erica.
I'm just going to step in a little bit here. I keep doing this maybe because I know the way that you function a little bit more than Sarah and Erica do, because I've had a number of years' experience working with some of you. You really need to check about how you're going to set up the salary. And if there's any possibility that a labour inspector can see that you're adding into the salary per diems or allowances, you're going to be hit. You have to be very, very careful about this, because I mean, we all know how the salary is made up, but it's salary. It's nothing else as such, and it's treated as salary with French social security.
And it is also important that the timesheets
Yeah.
match with the duration of work indicated in the work contract. It means if you indicate, for example, 39 or 48 hours in the work contract, and also the timesheet, you have to pay 35 hours plus 3 extra hours with an increase of 25%. And it is very important to clearly define and determine it in the pay slip.
Fiona, I have one question. When you speak of salary, are we to read it by the exact titles under which it is paid? Say per diem or a COLA, it cannot be considered, if you mean that. Or the consideration is whatever is guaranteed and taxes paid on it, all of that can be considered towards minimum wage. What is the consideration they go with?
So the consideration is that we, all three of us, whatever you give them is salary. What you do behind the scenes is what you do behind the scenes, but it's salary.
And when you say salary, is it the title, or I could give my compensation into 2 or 3 heads, salary,
So,
allowances,
what
which are all guaranteed and which are tax paid?
So what we've seen in the past is that we've seen in the past assignment letters in which you have Indian salary plus French assignment salary plus a per diem plus etc. And at the end you've got a total, and that total most of the time is well above the minimum that's required. But A, because you've given the document as such, it's an assignment letter which can be requested by a labour inspector, he's going to immediately jump on it. So whatever you determine as being given, even if you're taxing it all, that's the side point, even if the person's going to declare it even as income tax, you still have to only show it as salary on a payslip. And in any other document, you can say that you're going to give them above their salary this amount. So you could say, if we went back to the slide, I think it's the one before with the Syntec. We're going forward there. There, you're going to your Syntec. So let's take somebody with 2 years practice plus over 26. So he's got 2,358, okay? That's going to be the minimum Syntec, okay? So if you took that, that could be his French salary. And anything else that you're going to give above it, so you may have other things which you're going to give above it, that's above. And it's still going to be taxed. And still going to have his income, but it's not his salary.
Because the next slide we saw that benefits in kind can be considered towards the minimum included in salary. For example, if I give my employees accommodation worth 1,500 euros a month, because somewhere else I see travel accommodation costs excluded, but it is a benefit in kind. I'm paying it guaranteed beginning of every month. I am paying tax on it.
Under some section, benefit in kind, for example, if you give to the employee allowance for accommodation, Syntax consider that
It's a benefit.
It's a benefit
It's
in
a
kind
benefit in
and
kind.
it's included in salary.
So I can count that towards minimum wages.
Yes, but for example, travel reimbursement, it is clearly excluded from the salary to determine the,
And what about a per diem?
what?
A per diem? It's a daily allowance, a cost of living allowance.
It depends, but.
I don't think it's part of the syntax. It's not a benefit, yeah. So it's going to depend how you're going to be paying anything like that and how you determine it.
So per time does it come under the expenses to be reimbursed?
It comes under a travel allowance.
Okay.
So it shouldn't, a per diem should be excluded. But as Sarah's explained, if you're in a syntax, so you've got to check on your collective bargaining agreement before doing this. But what Praveen was saying, if you're syntax, and Sarah has confirmed this, and you're paying an allowance for housing, or you're paying the housing directly because it may be easier, that could be considered as a benefit.
Anything that is fringe benefit, social security contribution.
No, that's not part. Well, it's part of the package because it's going to be extracted. No, but it's not. No. So that's not. You can't take into the fact that the cost of your social security.
You have to be paid the social contribution to your staff, though.
Yes.
Yeah, for fringe benefits as well we have. Right?
Yes, but that's not. Yeah, but it's not. If it's going to be extracted or it's going to be a cost to you for deduction, you can't add it back in again. That's what I mean.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah, you can't do a gross up on it. Okay?
So, Erica, can you explain the payroll requirements during the assignment?
Yes, talking about talking about salary, we talk about payslip, and of course we got full requirements. The payslip it's mandatory to issue the payslip each month for each employee, even if the employee is joining the company at the end of the month. It is sometimes and exceptionally we can accept that the employee has not the payslip for the month, but it is very compulsory to respect this rule and issue the payslip each month for the employee. The net salary must be paid once a month. You can decide the date, the 25th, or 2 days, 2 work days before the end of the month, or the 5th of the next month. But each month, at the same date, rounded, you have to pay the net salary. The employee must receive the payslip on a print position at his personal address. So it's the reason why we were underlining the fact that the employee must mention his French address.
I think you can receive it also electronically.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, Fiona. You've got right now the obligation, not the obligation, but the option to send to the employee on the electronic way is payslip, but you can refuse it and ask only for the printed part.
And even if the detachment is under 1 month, we recommend to also deliver a payslip in order to show the social contribution and so on. Even if under French law, a detachment under French law doesn't
apply. But the reason, and I think the other reason is that if you don't issue a payslip for somebody who's, let's say, on a 2 or 3 week assignment, how are you going to be able to justify if there was a labour audit and they asked to see the payslip? So what are you going to do? You're going to show them their Indian payslip, but their Indian payslip doesn't show the social security. So nowadays, in the past, everybody used to do everything by hand, a little calculator. Nowadays, of course, it's all done through an IT system, and automatically, firms like Erica are always going to be doing a shadow payslip. So it's easier that the shadow payslip is given to the employee, even for an assignment that is under 1 month.
Following to that, we are going to talk about the semi-legal French working hours. How you can see, the minimum legal working time in France is 35 hours per week, which means 151.67 monthly hours. You have as well, like in India, but of course not the same figures, the maximum working hours per day, which is 10 hours. 12 hours is planned company assignment. Maximum working hours per week, we've got 48 hours maximum working per week. You've got, of course, the mandatory break time and maximum rest time per day, which is 11 hours. On the contrary, regarding the French rules, the lunch time and the tea break are not included in the working time for the work contract. And you've got the minimum rest time week, which is cumulative 24 hours consecutive. Talking about minimum legal working hours, we can talk about extra hours. Sarah had mentioned it as well previously. Talking about extra hours, you have to consider that all the hours worked up to 35 hours per week is extra hours. Sorry, they are calculated on the basis a weekly basis, and they are increased, recovered with time off. The increase is based on the collective labor agreement strict calculation, and the 8 first hours, 35 hours, are based on 25% more than the basic salary. Above. Yes. I'm sorry, above 35 hours. And from the 14th months, you've got the increase of 50%. Talking about the salary and the pay slip, we are talking about as well about the entitlement of vacation paid leave.
Still want to send your employees to France?
All the employees in France on a cement or on a full French work contract are entitled to 25 vacation days for a period of 12 months, which means 2.08 vacation paid leave per month. There is a reference period starting from June the 1st, for example, 2017, and ending to May 31st, 2018. For example, Prakash, who is joining the company, your company, on September the 1st, is entitled to around 19 vacation paid leave from the start date to May the 30th, 2018. And he will be able to take those 90 days till May 30th, 2019. So he gets 1 year to take those days entitled. And after each period, for example, for Prakash, if he has not taken those days or remaining 3 days at the end of May 2019, they are considered to be lost.
So what we Indian companies are used to carry forward doesn't happen.
So just you have this additional hours working, right? And is this a standard vacation policy of 2.48, or would the extra hours worked also would accrue the vacation?
Well, this is the vacation per leave indeed, but I will mention previously the extra hours can of course offer what we call rest day, and of course it depends on the intern policy regarding the working hours you have included in your company. So of course, but this is very separate, and with what we call RTT. The risk day is RTT days. And of course, if they are not taken, it is not the same. If we can just have 5 minutes talking about it, it is not the same period. The RTT has vested from the first day of the calendar day, so January, to December. And if they are not taken at the end of December, they are lost. So you cannot carry over like we do for the vacation paid leave for the next year.
On the working hours, you mentioned that it's 35 hours a week. So the normal working hours would be 9 a.m. to 4 p.m.
It could be 8.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
okay. Just
Yes.
take a start time
Yeah.
of 9 a.m. When we talk about the rest time of 30 minutes, so does that make the working hours 9 a.m. to 4:30, or is it included in the? So we can extend it by as many number of.
Any lunch breaks and tea breaks are excluded from the 35 hours. They come above that. And that's important. We'll be discussing it in the timesheets. It's important that when they fill out timesheets, I suggest always that on your timesheet you have working hours, came in, came out. And because they're going to say, oh, but what about the lunch break or my tea break? You have a separate column with lunch and tea.
And 30 minutes is mandatory?
20 minutes.
Can it be less or more?
No, it must be. Of course, it can be more, but the minimum is 20 minutes.
So I can tell the employees that your lunch break is 1.5 hours. So you work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. And then in between you can take your lunch hour of 1.5 hours.
French usually have a long.
And then
So
they
you
go
have
to
long
sleep.
Yeah.
Can we have John first?
Yeah.
No, come that side.
So regarding the
Little louder, John, please.
So the extra work hours, instead of including in the salary, can be given option to the employee to take a compensatory leave. Is that possible?
Yes, here's what we're talking about RTT days. You can pay, for example, we are talking about 39 hours per week. You must indicate 35 hours, and then the 4 hours, extra hours. Then you are paying the extra hours on this side. You can do as well, just indicate the hours for 35 hours, and then giving the employee RTT days, compensated the extra hours, but you are not paying the extra hours.
In that case, the employer has to sign any agreement. Which one is opting, whether taking salary or the days?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Does the employee need to sign an agreement stating that he's taking the RTT days or taking the extra salary? I think it's dependent on your syntax, right?
Yes, it's regarding the collective labor agreement, and you have to sign a instant policy saying that the RTTs the employee is entitled to RTTs and not extra hours payment. So it's not case to case, but it's linked to the company policy. So each employee will be linked to this contribution.
So your salary over there is based on your collective bargaining agreement. As a part of that collective bargaining agreement, you have this as one of the subjects, how extra time is dealt with. So based on your collective bargaining agreement, you get the rest day, or you get the payment, or an option of both, or whatever.
But you have it inside the policy. And we don't see very many, or it's not shared with us, what your global mobility policies are or your EU policies are for your employees, which is something which people should think about. It's very important. It also means that everybody's being treated, which in France is very important, fairly and the same. So if you put into place a policy, it's going to be the same policy for, of course, all your employees, and that's much, much easier for everybody to deal with.
So you mentioned by mutual agreement, the 35 hours to be increased to a max. One of the slides mentioned that, right? So let's assume I say that instead of 35 hours, it's 38 hours. Even though it is by agreement, the overtime requirements would start after 35 hours, right? So 35 hours is the base minimum, even though you have agreed for a longer.
I mean, you could have a contract, but it's completely different. It's not what generally you're not going to see here. But you could in France have a contract with somebody who's working 20 hours a week. That's also possible. And then when it goes under 20 hours, they also have to justify that they have employment elsewhere.
And with that 25% increase for the extra hours fee only for the basic salary component?
Yes, it is. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. The first one being that does the employee...
Can you be a little louder, please?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Does the employee have any provision to take paid leave during the first year of assignment in France, considering that the leave applicability only starts from June the 1st of the next year? And the second question is it necessary to pay the employee in a French bank account and not to an Indian bank account or through a travel card, specifically considering the point that it might take a couple of months or a month and a half to open a bank account in France?
So, vacation by law is accrued, as Erica explained. After that, each company can decide how they want to do it. I'll be very honest with you, inside my own company I have a policy that if somebody has worked a month, they've accrued 2.8. So I don't necessarily use the strict ruling. I could say, I'm sorry, you have no vacation until you've accrued it come June 1st, end of May, following year. I think that's a little bit tough on people. Vacation's required, but by law, you could say, no, I'm sorry, there's no vacation that's been accrued, so you don't have a right to a vacation. It's going to depend when they come in the year to do your calculation as such. Your other question was around
Payment of the salary.
Payment of the salary. Anybody who is on a French employment contract is paid into a French bank account. Anybody who's on detachment can be paid in India, can be paid in France, can be paid split. But you have to remember that you've got to justify the amount as per what's going to be the net salary on the French payslip. So sometimes it can get really very complicated. Now, people who are on short term, they're not going to open a French bank account. Opening a French bank account is another one of the French nightmares, and it is difficult for them to do because they're going to have to show that they've got a residence, they're going to have to show an assignment letter or an employment contract, and they're going to have to also show that they have a visa or a permit that's long stay, and then they'll be able to open their French bank account. But it's quite difficult for them to do. Anybody short term, they're not going to do it. So they're going to be paid into their India bank account. Now, we've had lots of discussions about Forex cards. And you are going to hear a lot of different opinions about the use of Forex cards. You're going to have some attorneys and some accounting practices and some immigration consultants who are going to say, that's absolutely fine, you can use a Forex card. Our belief following the discussions that we've had is that if you're using a Forex card, the Forex card must be in the employee's name, and it is the employee who uploads the amount from his account into the Forex card. It's not you who goes and puts, let's be honest, it's going to be his per diem into his Forex card, and you're going to say that that's his salary. That's not going to work. So the use of a Forex card, you've got to be very careful how you're going to use this, and you should check with whoever is your French legal advisor, and if not, you can see with Sarah, how you're going to use this, because it's definitely going to be something that a labour inspector is going to zoom in on and say, okay, but why? Somebody who's on short term, you can justify it. But somebody, I've got people who are on long term, and I have clients who say to me, yes, but it's so complicated, it's so much easier. We pay part of it into the Indian bank account, and then we put the rest onto a Forex card. And the Forex card is just used like this. But people are there for 9 months, 12 months. 12 months, you need to have a French bank account. I mean, for us in France, it seems incredible not to have a French bank account. And what you have to remember is that they will never be able to apply for a French social security number if they do not have a French bank account. So it's better to have the French bank account, anybody who's on a long term. And if you're using a Forex card, that, in our opinion, should be only uploaded from the employee's account into the Forex card and not from the company. Because you're going to be uploading amounts and it's never going to correspond to the actual amount from the payslip. It's going to be super difficult for you to do that.
So on that, any employer on detachment will have to pay the social security in France.
Yes.
How is that done if they don't have a social security number?
So you could, well, then I'll reply and Sarah can, Erica can correct me. What most companies like Erica's do is that when they don't have their social security number, and this can be the same for a young French person who might not have his French social security number, they use dummy numbers. So each social security number starts with 1 or 2. 1 is for a man, 2 is for a woman. And then you go into your, where you were born. So all foreign nationals, like myself, my social security number starts 299. 99 means that I was not born in France. For the French, it's going to indicate which department, which region they were born in. And then it's going to give their month and their year of birth, and then it's a whole number. So they make up dummy numbers with the information that they have. And some of the time, that can be used for 1 or 2 years, unless the person actually applies. But if the person doesn't apply for their social security number, A, the pay slip will not show this, and B, they will not be able to get any reimbursement in the French system. So you're deducting from your employee's salary, and maybe some of you are doing gross ups, but you're deducting French social security, so he is paying for his portion, and he's not benefiting from the French medical system. And if you want him to benefit, and he'd like to benefit, and let's say some of them are coming in with a wife, who may be expecting a baby, and we've had this issue, they need to go to the hospital. Well, the hospital is going to ask for the French social security number and that they're registered. So it really is advisable to apply for it. We say assignments that are less than 6 months, no, because it's so long to apply for. Assignments that are over 6 months, yes, apply for. Today, we do have a very new, nice little accelerated procedure for those who are on talent passports. So talent passports, they can apply the day they walk into France, they can file the application if they've got a bank account, which of course they don't have. But if they have all the things, they can immediately apply. Anybody else on a different status, like detachment temporary, they have to wait 3 months at the moment. Now, things are moving forward because everybody's complained, and we believe that it's incredible that foreign nationals who are paying into a system are not benefit. I mean, you are covered and you will be reimbursed later. It's not that you're not going to be reimbursed, but to begin with, you're going to be paying it out. So I know that a lot of you also give them private medical insurance, so maybe they're getting reimbursed through that. But sometimes it's not the case, and we see that. So we are pushing it with the government, and we believe that it's going to come through that everybody will be able to file immediately as such. But it's a very archaic system, and the fact that you have to provide these birth certificates and marriage certificates with apostles, and it's one of the things that you should actually all really, really check at the beginning. Do the birth certificates have exactly the same names as in the passports? And if they don't have the same names as in the passports, and their parents' names are the same, then they must go and have an affidavit done. They must have an apostille, because it is so important. I can tell you, if the name has one letter that is different, one letter, the CPA will say, no, we're not taking the application. So you could waste 4 months until you see that. So it's really, these birth certificates, marriage certificates are practically as important as a payslip in some cases.
Is that generally how long it takes to get a social security number?
So to get a social security number, to get a temporary number, if you're lucky, you'll get it in 6 weeks, if you're lucky. A temporary number. Immediately, an employee has a temporary number. He can file for the reimbursement of any medical costs he's had. He will send these in by post as such. Once he gets his full number, and he will then get also a little form to add an ID photo and his signature, and he will get a carte vitale, which I can show anybody who wants to look at one. And into their system, and you still have to pay. I don't think you're not going to pay, but the reimbursement happens in 10 days there. And to get your full number, best case scenario, 3-4 months. Worst case scenario, 2 years.
So it's bank account and then 6 weeks and then 4 months?
Yeah.
And a bank account?
Bank account, if you have everything, can be very, very quick, and it's really going to depend on the banks. They're very wary of foreign nationals opening bank accounts. They want to know what it's about. I would say that for most of them, as they're coming in with assignment letters and employment contracts, it shouldn't be too difficult. Anybody who's using a relocation agency should check with the relocation agency, but it is something that's difficult. I mean, I have business people who are opening companies in France, and I only have one bank that will open their bank accounts for them. So it's something which you'll hear from your employees, it's so difficult, etc. And they're not complaining, it really is difficult. And it's in French, so yeah, it's not something that's easy. I think you should check with your service provider if they've got a system and that they could help. So pay to the kick, we're over paid vacation.
Furthermore, the employees are entitled, furthermore, vacation paid leave on RTT days in the case that the extra hours are not paid but are compensated by more days. We've got sickness leave, maternity leave, and paternity leave. The employee is entitled to these days, and it is, for example, he's going to the doctor, and then he's delivered a certificate, a medical certificate, saying that he's not able to work for instance leave, or indicating that the employee is on maternity leave or paternity leave. And the employee must deliver this certificate or inform his employer that during the 48 hours, mention that he's not capable to come to work. And therefore, with this certificate, and because of his registered to the CPIM, the salary will be maintained during these days. We are talking about as well public holiday. We've got many in France, but it is mandatory not to work for the employee only on May the 1st. If the employee can work on the other days, but he's paid twice.
But there are around 10 public holidays per year.
Regarding the Solidarity Day, procedures have been placed to compensate for main and honestly, I'm sorry, I'm confused.
It's to help.
Yes.
So what happened was that there was one summer. It was incredibly hot in France, and very sadly, a lot of old people died. And the French government discovered that actually there wasn't very much help, financial help for these people. So they set up a Solidarity Day, which is a day that either is fixed on the government day, or you choose as a company, and people work or they don't work, but all of that pay is given, the cost to you as a company is paid to the government state, and it's one day a year that has to be given financially, and it's to help this pension or this fund for old people, retired people.
Senior citizen and
yes,
uncapable. Thank you, Shannon.
Transport costs.
Down the payslip, we've got the transport cost. The transport cost, and the employee is entitled to 50% of the travel cost reimbursement per the employer. Indeed, from the home, the French address to the company, he can buy the travel ticket. And using the public transport, the employer must reimbursement minimum 50% of this amount. And of course, for that, the employee must provide the subscription proof. Without this proof, the employer must not make the reimbursement of the travel transport, because it would be considered like benefit in kind, and therefore submitted to charges, because the reimbursement of the travel ticket down the payslip is net, so it's not charged. There is an option, I mean the payment of the travel cost is optional if the employee take his own car to get from the office to his home address. And this is compulsory to be mentioned on the pay slips.
So what's very, very important here is that this is a fixed amount of a cost. You cannot say, and we had this question yesterday, you cannot say, oh, well, actually it's going to be much easier. We're going to determine we're reimbursing 60 euros to all our employees who are in France, full stop. No, that is illegal. You can only reimburse exactly 50% of what the cost is, and only if they give you the receipt. If they don't give you the receipt, and you do choose to give them 60 euros a month for that, then you're going to have the social charges on top of that, as such. If you don't want to have the social charges, then it has to be the exact amount, and you have to have the justification. And what you will see sometimes is that, especially those who are in a large city, which is most of your employees, they may, for long term, they may take a travel transport pass that's valid for 1 year or for a quarter of a year, and so you don't reimburse 50% on the whole amount for a year, you reimburse it monthly. Okay?
You were mentioned previously the social contribution. Each month, the employer must declare via DSM, which is the obligation from January the 1st, 2016. But for regarding the payment, if the company gets less than 9 employees, you will have to pay it on a quarterly basis. If the company hire more than 9 employees, will be paid on a monthly basis. So the payment must be paid on the 15th of the month after the period, the consent period. If, for example, you pay the social contribution from January, it will be paid on February the 15th. If you pay for the first quarter, it will be paid on April the 15th, and not before. After, in case of late payment, will be applied 10% of the amount you're supposed to pay for the contribution regarding the penalties. Sometimes we can try to cancel them, but after 3 late payments, or sometimes 2 late payments, we cannot cancel them, and it will be very, very huge payment for you. And what we can propose for the payment is if the employer, so if your company gets a French bank account, we can make directly an automatic payment. So we are declaring, I mean, the payroll provider is declaring on your behalf the social contribution, and then each French fund can take automatically on your French bank account the corresponding amount. Therefore, there is no late payment, and there were no issue regarding any penalties applied. The second proposal is if you have not French contract, the payroll provider gives you all the reference and details in order for you to pay the social contribution in due course. And therefore, it's their responsibility to ensure that you get those information in due time. And as well, the payroll provider can make the payment on your behalf, and sometimes, of course, as a required management phase. And as I say, in case of late payment, you will have 10% penalties.
So you all have on your chairs, and Erica perhaps can, if people have questions, copies of dummy payslips, copies of what is in the payslip, because it's all in French, and it can be quite complicated to read. And you also have a whole explanation as an Excel spreadsheet with a given salary, so that you can see how this is calculated as such.
So, if you look at the first page, which is this one, like a Excel one, I'm sorry, it's very, very, very small. You've got different parts of the social contribution. On the top, you've got yourself, and you've got the description of the contribution, the basis, and applied all the employee and the employer rates. We've got as well the employment contribution, which are not more paid to Pôle emploi, but paid directly to the yourself. Then you've got the retirement fund in case of full French contribution, because in case of deputation, you've got the Indian pension contribution that you can mention into the French payslip. And you have the name of the French fund, depends, Humanis or Malakoff Medinet, and of course it makes the calculation of the payslips. On the second page, if you have no reference to the first one, you have here the print of a payslip, and there is compulsory information that we have mentioned previously, like the company information, all the ID details of the company, all the administrative and work contract information regarding the employees. So on the top, you've got the company and then the employees. And then you've got the details of all the payslip, talking about working times, total gross salary, and of course description of the social contribution. And we are talking about the transport card, and if you can see, you've got the, on the first column, you've got forfait annuel Navigo to zone. I don't know if you can see it.
So annual subscription for all zones.
And then you've got the basis of the price that the French system have decided, and of course taking the 50% of this amount. So down the payslip, you've got the information of the net salary on the right, and on the left, so down the payslip, you've got the vacation account, and if the extra hours are not compensated, they will have the RTT days account as well, just here next to the vacation days.
So I just want to take something here to show the really, really important things for you to be able to check. Now, everyone asked if somebody else could be designated as the legal representative. Yes, I act as legal representative for a large number of companies and cases. And when we do it, we have a whole team, and when we receive copies of pay slips, copies of timesheets, and copies of the justification of the payment, what do? We check that the timesheet is showing the same amount of working hours. If they've worked over the 35 hours, we've got in there overtime that it's showing. We're going to check that the gross salary is the same or it's above what was given on the work permit, so that we're in line. And we're going to check that the net salary is what the person is actually being paid. So those are the points. If you have a legal representative in France, that you must be certain either the person is dealing with it, you might have, I mean, we've got people who are CEOs, so they're not going to be going through it, but then you have somebody in your team who is going through this on a monthly basis, because that is what the labour inspector is going to look at.
If I may just add in over there, a lot of companies, especially IT companies, link the timesheet to billing. Okay, so that's really, really dangerous, because number one, your contract with the client may be 40 hours a week. However, over here, you're only allowed 35 hours a week, number one. Number two, the moment you're billing hours, you're going against the law, you're loaning employment. Okay, so you have to bill a contract and not hours. So this timesheet we're talking about is basically for salary and not for they're two different things.
Now, this isn't a timesheet for your billing. You need to have a timesheet for your billing, keep it separate. This is timesheet, which is for those on detachment or those working on a client site, so that you want to be able to justify that they have a link with their employer, so employer in France, a manager in France, or if they're on detachment with their manager in India or elsewhere. And that is the time that they work, but it's not for a billing purpose at all.
amount, what you have.
Louder, Shiva, please.
Yeah, your amount, what you have indicated in the agreement, whatever is the bargaining agreement, would be the final wage which has to get calculated as a gross salary in the business. That's what you're ultimately saying. And calculation per hour would be based on that as a base salary out here, what I see in the business, 151 or something like that, divided by number of hours, or the base salary will remain 151. What exactly it is?
Base salary is always going to be 151, 35 hours.
That's 5 hours per day.
35 hours per week.
35 hours per week.
Yes.
You also have something called profit sharing in France. So how does that work and how it is accounted?
It's a case we can discuss after the conference if you want, because it's very detailed and specific to the plan of the profit sharing.
Profit sharing company, and it's not going to be for everybody.
So that, because of the time consumed, we will talk about that during the networking time. You can speak with Erica about that. Okay. So then, we are now done with the second part of our presentation. So again, any further questions before we move on to the end of assignment or after the assignment is complete?
Only one question. See, we have this training of, when we do the training for the employees, 1% of the payroll costs, 1% of the payroll costs have to be used for the employees. We have more than 10 employees in France, right? So does it cover under the service slip or do you separate?
We will separate. Yes.
On the detachment arrangement, can we physically pay in France as well? That's fine. That's not an issue.
It's not an issue. Detachment status, they can be paid anywhere that you want. You just have to justify that they have been paid.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
And it can be split.
Yeah, it can be split.
It can be split. It's just to remember the use of the Forex card. Really take the advice from your legal advisors. Sarah is here. Because if you have a labour inspection, it's going to be your French labour law attorney who's going to be defending you. So it's better that they're aware that you're using a Forex card and they have said yes, no, or this is how it should be done.
On the Syntec minimum, we use the 40 hours per week to find the minimum. So will that be a problem when you actually work for 35 hours? The Syntec minimum.
Yes, you're taking a 40 hour.
40 hour week.
Okay.
So will that be a problem if he actually works for 35 hours?
Regarding the French legal working hours, is 35 hours per week.
There's also a 40 hour week.
Yes, but the minimum, the legal one is the 35. So you actually get 35 hours and the fifth more, like extra hours. So it will be the total basic salary. But the minimum one is 35. So you have to apply increase of payment from the first 8 one after above the 35 working hours.
Go ahead.
What is the work location that you actually do in the timesheet, the payslip, and registration, the residence permit? So does the work location have to be same in all these 3 documents?
So for the work permit, because your employees are working on a client site, you should always indicate it into it. Whatever category, you should always show this. We've even now started adding into support letters reporting lines, so that we're very clear at the beginning when a labour office gives an approval, they know that the employee is going to work on a client site, but that we've clearly shown that reporting line goes back home. On a residence permit, the client location does not show. But you have to be very careful, because what we see is that sometimes people apply for a work permit, a talent passport, and because your company is based in Paris, you say, okay, talent passport, very easy, and you forget to put the location where the client is, or you put it in and it's approved, and then because you're really, really in a hurry and you've got a super process, you say, oh, I'm going to actually even put them to be physically living in Paris, and you're having them working down in Lyon. When the labour inspector comes in and he looks at the permit, he's going to say, but you have a permit that's Paris-based and you're working down here. So the permit, the residence permit, I should have taken a picture to show you, but the residence permit, which is a tiny little card, does not show the location of where the client is, but it does show where he lives. And I mean, it's obvious, nobody's going to be living 500 miles away. We do have express trains. I do have employees who take one and they live 250 kilometers away and they come in every day to work. But you can't do that for everybody as such. So that on that portion. Then the client's address will not show on a paid slip. On the ones which you've got the dummy pay slips. Oops, here we go. On the dummy pay slips, and this is actually another point which is very, very important, you see the name of the company up here. That's the employer. If they're on detachment, their employer is not in France. So if your payroll, who's ever handling your payroll in France, is producing pay slips which show a French company as the employer and your employee is on detachment, it's not right. And that's something that you have to work with your payroll service provider to have corrected. And you can get into quite a lot of a discussion about it because a lot of them do not know how to do this, and a lot of them will say to you that their system, their IT system, does not allow them to do it. So you have to insist, and you say, when you get your IT system changed, because that has to be shown. And it's also one of the other points that some of these labour inspectors don't necessarily have any knowledge about your area in which they work. We had a labour inspector the other day, and he works normally on a construction site. So he has no idea of your business. And he doesn't necessarily have a deep knowledge about payslip. So when he picks up a payslip and he sees that this has a French company, he'll say, why has this got a French company? And you're deducting the Provident Pension Fund? Because for him, if it's showing a French company, the person is employed by the French company and not by the home country company. So that's going to be important, but you're not going to be showing your client address on it. The only place that you show the client address is on the work permit. Now, for talent passports, this is something which is also very important. When you use a talent passport and you show a client Alcatel in Toulouse, and then you decide that actually he's going to work for Air France 6 months later in Paris, you should always refile, just as a notification to the Paris Labour Office, to say, my talent passport was issued in Toulouse because that was where he's working, but actually right now he's coming back to Paris and he's going to be working for Air France. Please find attached a new work permit form. Probably they're going to come back to you and say, it's not necessary. That's super. You've got that in the file. When the labour inspector comes in to Air France, you can say, no, but the Labour Office told me that that was fine. And the labour inspector cannot go back on what his colleague has said. But you should take the precaution of doing it, because when you don't take the precaution of doing that, then you could get into a situation where the labour inspector says, but I'm sorry, the initial authorization, even if he's on a local contract, was given for him to be working for Alcatel in Toulouse, and it was no mention of him going to work for Air France. So we always say double precaution, just refile. It's just a notification letter. It's not refiling for a whole permit category. It's just so that they're notified. Sometimes they put a stamp on it and they send it back to you. Sometimes they don't do anything. Sometimes they'll come back and say it's not necessary. But you've notified it by recorded mail.
And what about timesheet? Is it that?
So no, the timesheet is not going to show a client site. It's not for billing, as we said. It's the recording of his worked time. So it's going to show the employee, my suggestion is that it should have the name of the company who employs him, the employee, the dates, the hours he's worked, his lunch break, and if you're giving him a tea break. Okay?
Fiona, I had a question. You just spoke about so when there's a change in the place, you have to go to the labor office and you have to make a change, right? You have to inform. So what if there's a change in what job description you were doing, what you have declared, and it is going
And
to
it's
be
going to
changed?
change. So if the employee is on detachment, temporary detachment, there you would be required to file a new work permit. Because temporary detachment really is to authorise them for exactly the services that you've listed. So if they change, they change. If they're on their local employment contract, okay? If they're going from accounting to marketing, yes, you should inform. If they're just going from something which is slightly different, no, you don't have to inform as such. Okay, because they're on a local status and you can change your job within a job, and after 2 years, anyway, on a local status, they could change into a completely new role. Okay?
Fiona, I had a question about the legalized birth certificate required for registration. Legalization is a very lengthy process. So, can we have birth certificate issued from Indian Embassy in France and use it for registration?
Yes. So that's a very good question. It's something which we would actually even say the easiest way of doing it is to get that. But your employee has to do that himself. I've been to the embassy, I've tried all I can to say, can we provide this as a service? We work with VFS so the whole time, it would be very easy, you know as well. And they're absolutely mandatory. This has to be the person who goes into VFS in Paris to request this and has to go back and collect it. In the past they used to go into the embassy, they went in, they spent half a day in the embassy, they came back and they had to spend yet again another half day. Well, now it's a little bit easier. But if you have an employee who's working 500 kilometers away, it means he's got to take a train up to Paris, he's got to spend his day doing that, and then he's going to have to come back up to collect it. But the advantage, if they can do that, is the fact that also it's going to be issued in French. So we don't have to go through a certified translation.
Any other questions? Okay, so now we enter the last part of today's presentation. It's about the end of the assignment. Sarah, what from a labor law perspective is required?
There are no specific provisions in the French Labour Code related to the end of assignment rules. We only notice, remember, that French termination rules are not included in the list previously seen of limited mandatory rules applicable for an employee on detachment. But as per the definition of the detachment, which is supposed to be temporary, obviously, the employee must leave France at the end of the assignment. This excluded talent passport, European blue card, permit category, as the employee is not an assignment. So the terms of assignments will cease upon the last working day of the employee in France. This point is very important because the risk for the foreign company if the employee continues to work after the end date of his assignments is that the rules on assignments no longer apply. The full French rules concerning social security will be applied. And what can you do if the employee refuses to return in the home country? There's no rules in the French labor code. So first, we advise stopping the payment of the employee's salary with the last working day as you indicated previously. Then you send to the employee an official notice, official letter by registered letter indicating that he must return to his country as per the deputation letter. That's why it is recommended to remind in the deputation letter signed with the foreign company within the employee on detachment, the obligation of this letter to return to his country at the end of the assignment, subject to dismissal for gross misconduct, for example. And failing that, in my view, the employer could initiate the dismissal proceedings under Indian law.
Thank you. Erica, I'm sure there are quite a few payroll requirements at the end of the assignment.
Yes, based on the payroll point of view, the payroll must be cut off with the last working days of the employee. If package is on ending the deputation, the employee is transferred to India with the payment of the vacation paid leave not taken, it was entitled to, but not taken during the assignment. In case that package in a French work contract, and at the end of the French work contract, is given furthermore some termination indemnities, depending on the reason of this end of contract. And what you must know is that the talent passport employee called salarié en mission and local French or on local French statute is not entitled to unemployment contribution even if they have contributed to it into the pay slips. These are the employees which are not entitled to it, to benefit of the employment contract.
Thank you. And Fiona, what about from an immigration perspective?
So, in France, there's no mandatory deregistration, which is great. But there certainly are, I would say, precautions that have to be taken. First of all, if you have an employee who is coming back to India and is going to be reapplying very shortly for a different permit category, then most definitely you need to notify the French Labour Office, and his permit, if he has a card permit, should be returned. Because when this doesn't happen, there can be a lot of confusion, and either the Labour Office doesn't understand why you're refiling, or what can happen is, let's say you had somebody who was on temporary detachment, you bring them back, you've decided you want to put them onto a talent passport, salarié en mission, so there they are filing at the French consulate. French consulate is probably going to say, fine, they're not going to check the system. And when the person comes back into France and he goes into the prefecture to file, the prefecture is going to say, but what's happening here? I don't understand. He's already got a permit and now he's getting another permit. So it's better to cancel. It's not mandatory, but it's advisable to cancel. It's also advisable, in our opinion, as I explained before, that permits are collected from employees who return so that you don't have a control system that it's going to be so difficult to put in place to find out where they are, how they're using their permits, are they traveling to Europe, to the Schengen states, is a project manager asking them to go back in and you're not aware of it, so the social security isn't started up again. It's always best that these are cancelled as such, but there's no mandatory immigration requirements. The only other requirement which you have to remind your employees of is tax, which we are not authorized to really speak about, or we can't give you the advice because we're not tax experts, but an employee could have an income tax filing that has to be completed. It's no longer required that that has to be completed prior to them leaving. Our suggestion is that it's easiest for those who have been on a long-term assignment and who have in the past filed income tax to go to their tax office and to say, I'm now leaving, here is my address in India, please do the necessary. It's online, our tax system, so you file online, it can be deducted directly from their bank account, as long as they keep their bank account open in France, and if they don't, well then the tax officer has their name and address. Housing tax is another subject in France. Housing tax, the person is liable, whoever is in the house on the 1st of January. So good luck for those who arrive afterwards, because they don't pay for that year, and bad luck for those who are in it and who may be leaving on the 20th of January, because they're the ones who are going to be responsible for paying the housing tax as such. And the French social security numbers, for those who have been lucky enough to get their French social security numbers, are valid for life. That number will remain with them. There's no official deregistration, but when they leave, of course, the Social Security sees in their system that the payments aren't coming through. So let's say 2 years later they came back on another assignment, then they just have to be it's not a whole application, but they have to be re-registered themselves as somebody coming back in.
Perfect. So do we have any more questions on the end of the assignment or on anything on the whole presentation? We will take them now.
Can you explain a little bit on the collective bargaining agreements, how they work?
So the difference, so you have the collective bargaining agreement is determined by what area of work you're in. So IT is generally Syntec.
You have a code in the payslip. The French administration gives you a code depending of the activity of the employee. But generally, for an IT company, we apply Syntec.
Generally, but I mean it could be different. I'm not an IT company, but my collective bargaining agreement is Syntec as such. Most companies that start up choose, and because the rulings are very, very variable, but you do have a little bit of a choice. I mean, if you're dealing in the steel industry, no, you won't be able to go and exactly choose as such, but you do have a little bit of a choice. And the collective bargaining agreement is showing in the work permit application. So it's already showing right at the beginning before we're even getting into a payslip.
What does the collective bargaining agreement do?
You want me to? Sorry? What does the collective bargaining agreement do?
It makes the difference between the French legal, the minimum French legal, I mean, all the compulsory, I'm sorry.
The collective bargaining agreement is negotiated between an employer organization and trade unions. It is in order to provide generally rules more favorable than the law, you know.
And sometimes not.
Sometimes
not.
not.
This is less.
Sometimes not. But you know, the French rule often change. And the President Macron will, in the near future, will clean the applicable rules. So, you know, when we indicate that the rate for 1 extra hour is 25%, maybe tomorrow, if Macron changes, collective bargaining agreement could determine a rate below 25%. It depends on the negotiation between French employer organization and trade union. This is what Macron plans to do in the future.
But it's very, very strong. It's an entity which is very strong. I mean, trade unions are very strong in France, although they're a complete minority group, but they're very strong, and they're recognized as such. And the collective bargaining agreement is something which is very important. Those who have a large French company, it's over 50 before you have to get into a... Yes. It's over 50. Yeah, over 50. So immediately you have over 50 employees in France. You are also going to be designating people who are going to be officially representing the company. And it's going to get much, much stricter, the rulings inside your company.
And then itself we have employee delegates, right?
Yes, yes.
And there will be some deductions also for trade union contributions?
Is already applied, even if the company is not getting...
So long as you're linked to a Syntec number, so long as you choose to apply that collective bargaining agreement to your company, you have to make the contribution.
Yes.
And are all employees in France members of these trade unions or
So even if he's not entitled to trade union compensation, he must contribute to it.
But what he may see, so he may see if your company is a large company in France, or if he's working on the site of a large company, he's probably going to see trade unions. And if he has any disagreement on his employment, he would certainly probably go to a trade union. And they're very, I mean, they have a lot of knowledge and they have legal departments and everything, so yeah, they're going to advise him and help him if he doesn't agree with what you're saying,
And the collective bargaining agreement applicable to a consulting company or an IT company could be quite different from the collective bargaining agreement that applies to the client side, right?
Yes.
Only the expanded collective bargaining agreement are applicable. Expanded, I don't know the term for étendu.
The one who are published into the official journal.
Okay.
Because certain rules in the collective bargaining agreement are mandatory and extended, and other provisions are not mandatory.
It could be optional.
Okay.
And there is one last point which I don't think I really explained fully, is those who are on talent passport salarié en mission, so they're on the local ICT employment contract, yes, it is mandatory that they have to payment into the unemployment fund in France, which is called Pôle emploi. That is mandatory, but they will never benefit from it. So, unfortunately, not only is the employer, but also the employees playing into it, but they cannot benefit from it. Now, why can't they benefit from it? I mean, in my opinion, it shouldn't even be there.
Yes, it's strange.
It's very strange, but they cannot benefit from it because inside a talent passport is the idea that this employee is not a permanent employee. He's on an ICT, he's got a local French employment contract, but at the end of his assignment, he's going to either go back home or he's going to be reintegrated somewhere else in the group. But although this is not established into the contract, it is, in theory, the fact that he would not be unemployed at the end of the assignment, which is why, as Sarah says, if an employee under that category took the company to court, it would be considered very strange because he's not unemployed, he's not terminated, he's just going back home.
So he's not supposed to benefit of the unemployment insurance.
Okay, so you had a question.
In the context of, the foreign employer being considered an employer, how does that work? Because the paperwork is so tight in terms of understanding the service agreement is with the home country employer. The payment is coming from there. The timesheets are signed by the manager. So under what circumstances, you did mention that after 2 years, if the employee turned around and took the foreign employer to court, there would be chances of actually being considered an employer. How does that work? Because supervision and control doesn't lie. Under what circumstances?
So that's why we say it's so important that these employees are really tracked and have regular meetings. If you have these people who are on what we call temporary detachment, but they're temporary detachment long term, so let's say they're going to spend 2 years with Alcatel, they don't have to have a strict rotation physically, because they are on detachment, you've said from the beginning, but you've still got to show that the home company has a complete control of these people. So you set up a reporting system, they have regular calls, these are documented, etc. So that you're showing that at no moment did you say, I'm sending you to Alcatel. Actually, Alcatel is sort of your employer, but not really your employer, and it's not. You have to be very clear with your employee at the start of your assignment letter, which is why we always recommend that assignment letters should be drawn up by French attorneys.
Apart from the employment agreement?
Apart from the employment contract, I mean, you have to determine, of course, an assignment letter is something that's going to be used in the court here, but the assignment letter has also got to really show, if he did take you to court in France, that no, there's an assignment letter that's been drawn up, and it's very clear you are on an assignment to Alcatel from this date to this date. You remain on your home country employment contract, you will have French social security, and at the end of your assignment, you will be coming back, and during your assignment, you will be reporting to Manager Y in India. So you're very clear they're not going to be employed by...
Because if not, the employee could consider as that the French customer is the co-employer and say, I have a permanent contract with the French customer, and then I stay in France.
And especially if he turns around and says, but I've never reported back home. I'm always reporting to Mr. Dupont, and I have regular meetings with Mr. Dupont, and Mr. Dupont tells me what to do. And Mr. Dupont actually tells me when I can go on holiday, and he produces an email saying, I asked Mr. Dupont to take my holidays next month, and he said yes, but I didn't go back to my home country manager. Those are the kind of little things where you have to be very careful about.
Is there any obligation on Mr. Dupont not to approve his leave?
No, Mr. Dupont shouldn't be approving anything. He shouldn't be approving anything whatsoever. So we have the same sort of presentations to the French companies, and you'd be very surprised, a lot of them have no knowledge, where we say to them, you've got to be very careful, and the big group that they have to be careful about is not when you're doing your intra-company transfers. I mean, you speak to your equivalent people inside your company, human resources, payroll, so most of the time that's fine. Where the real difficulty is with the clients, and big companies in France don't know who is on their client side. They do not know. There are very few. There are some major French automobile constructors who do know when they come in, because they're going to get a badge. The nuclear energy ITER, the largest nuclear energy project in the world, yes, they get a badge at the beginning. You have a couple of other ones. Airbus, they get a badge when they come in. But once they've come in, nobody is controlling anything, and nobody knows that they're there. So even if what we try to do when we're managing it is that we actually call up your clients, the human resources, we introduce ourselves, and we say, we will be sending all of this to you. This is for Prakash, who's going to be with you for 2 years. We keep a control. Please don't worry about anything to do with the legal reporting. We're very strict about that. And if you did have a labour inspection, please come and see us. But let's say you don't have a legal representative, and let's say you have a talent passport. You should encourage project managers either to introduce human resources to your human resources on your client, just to say, I am sending one of my employees to work on your client site, and if you have any questions, please come back to me. Because they don't know who's there. They've got hundreds, I mean really hundreds and hundreds of service providers coming in, and they've come to us. I mean, we've had some really interesting discussions, and one of their issues is on service providers. Mr. Macron has also recently, for his own communications, been speaking a lot about detachment, and he's just been speaking about EU detachment, so he hasn't already got outside of the EU, but it's one of his big subjects.
Narahari.
This is in line with what Rohan spoke about billing. So, just want to understand, are we saying that the time and material projects kind of model doesn't work in France?
So, Narahari's question is, I mentioned that billing should not happen by hours and days and weeks, but should happen as a project. So his question is billing by hours, days and weeks illegal in France, correct?
It is recommended, as we indicated previously, that in the service agreement that you determine a lump sum based on the service delivery or the specific missions, and not to indicate an amount or invoice on hours, etc. In order to avoid that the core of the French administration consider that you are under irregular loan employee. So determine a lump sum based on the specific mission. That's all.
So probably a fixed bid kind of project and not a TN.
Yeah, so a fixed bid, or even if you're looking at that, you should say for this mission or this assignment, let us fix this as the amount for whatever, but you should be billing like a fixed price project rather than a TNM. Okay, I have a couple more questions from people here. How long can a person be on loss of pay if such a situation arises? So what this basically means is if Rohan is over there on an assignment and his vacation is over, he's used the vacation and takes vacation over that. So it's on loss of pay.
Unpaid.
Is that unpaid leave? Is that allowed? To what extent?
No, the employee is entitled to a number of paid leaves.
Correct.
He take them.
He's used them.
He used them, so he's paid during his on vacation.
Yes, but if he wants to take extra days and he's going to be unpaid, is that authorised?
Yes, yes, of course. He must be unpaid. And unless the policy, the Indian policy say that even if the employee is not entitled to those paid, entitled yet to those paid leave, he can take before they have been entitled.
And how is that limited? Or could he say, can an employee say, I would like to take 1 month off and it's unpaid?
Yes, he can, if the employees do agree.
If they agree?
Yes.
So,
We're not paid during this
yes,
month.
but there has to be an employer agreement.
Yes.
Yes.
So the answer is yes, unpaid leave or LOP, what we call loss of pay in India, is permitted provided the employer is in agreement to grant the same. The next question is, what if there is an extension of work when an old assignment is coming to an end and there is a change of employment? What happens? Change of employment as in, it could be a different client, the assignment may be different.
Okay, so that's really going to depend on the permit category. If you have somebody who is on temporary detachment as a service provider, they have to come back to India and you have to reapply for a new permit with a new agreement. If you have somebody who is on a salarié en mission, so it's local status, there you would have to just indicate to the new Labour office that your employee is now coming in to work for Air France, for example in Paris, rather than working for Alcatel in Toulouse because he's finished. Now, it's not mandatory. It's just a protection because, and this is really going to depend on how your immigration service provider is handling it. We, because we want to protect you, when we use local status and we know that they're going to be working on a client site, we put the client site onto the work permit application. So we're really clear at the beginning that these people are, yes, they're local status, but they're actually going to be placed to work on a client site. So if they change client site, yes, we are also going to go back to the new Labour office to say they're no longer there, they're now coming here. But it's a protection, and if you don't do it, well, you would be getting into questions. So either you're going to have a really clear rotation. If you have a very clear rotation and you've got your service agreements in place, I would say that maybe you don't need to put it into your work permit. And you could say, I'm not going to put it in my work permit at all, but I've got a very clear documentation through my MSAs, through the actual reporting system. I know where they are. They're actually only there for 4 months. Then I bring them back into the office in Paris for 1 month, and then I'm going to send them out there, or for 1 week, and then I'm going to send them out there. So you're showing that every time you're showing that it's temporary by nature. It's always this idea of temporary by nature, which is not determined by law.
It's a case by case.
It's a case by case, and it's going to be very much the labour inspector himself who is going to decide. And just to show you how complicated it can be, in the past 6 months, we've had numerous clients who've been hit with labour inspections. And each labour inspector has his own requirements. So 1 week I'm going to be seeing a labour inspector who's going to say to me, I don't like talent passport, I don't think it's clear, even if you provide all the information, I don't think they should be working on a client site. I think you should use temporary detachment. And then the next week I'm going to see another labour inspector who's going to say, I don't really like this temporary detachment when it's above 6 months. I think if it's above 6 months, they should all be placed onto a local employment contract. So it's very difficult to determine, which is why we believe that it's very, very important, and this is where it really is important, that not only inside your company, in the past, immigration was great. It was just visa, work permit, in, I'm compliant. It's now highly complex in most countries across the world. Inside the company, human resources, immigration, tax, legal, finance must work together. They must work together, and outside, in the country you're going into, you should also have your legal, your payroll, and your immigration, and maybe your tax, working together. And that they know each other, so that between themselves, sometimes they can call up and say, you know, I've got a little bit of a problem on a payroll because this company is not paying vacation days. So that can be escalated by the attorney up to legal, and it can go down to human resources, and it can be sorted out very quickly. But when you don't have this communication, which should flow freely in place, then spot checking is not going to happen, and that's when you're going to have some issues as such. But a lot of the time, we see that, yes, we have to put strategy. We like working on strategy. We encourage people to explain their projects. What are you trying to do in France? Do you already have a lot of employees in France? Do you not have employees in France? Working with your attorneys, should your company be just a branch? Should it be a subsidiary? Should it be a legal rep office? What status do you have? And a lot of things are going to depend around that.
Any other questions? Super. So thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the... Oh, sorry.
So is there a provision to file a multi-location work?
You can, we have done it when you have the same client but on multi-sites. Yes, we've done that. But you still have to file, if they're on detachment, you've still got to file your prior detachment declaration and your legal rep letter in each jurisdiction to be really sure that the labour inspectors are aware of it. But you could file, you've got Air France, Paris, Toulouse, Bordeaux, you could put all of that down on one site, on one work site.
And how about the registration? Where should we go and do the registration?
To the first client site.
Any other questions? So as I started saying, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. We do have a networking lunch, which is down the corridor where you have tea and coffee in the morning. It's ready. So thanks once again. Thank you so much, Sarah, Erica, and Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And look forward to chatting with all of you.